And you can WhatsApp on that number and watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, it's a text question to start with from Jennifer in Carshalton. Are there any upsides to Trump's tariffs? Stewart Jackson.
It's difficult to tell, Iain, at the moment, because obviously for an hour we won't know what they're going to be. I think it will force us, the only upside I can see immediately, to look again at the half-completed free trade agreement that the May government and later the Johnson government did with Trump earlier and then with the Biden administration. As I understand it, there is quite a bit of progress on that. Obviously, that was curtailed by the disintegration of the Conservative government and the election of a Labour government. But I do think...
and COVID.
And COVID,
and Biden.
And Biden. But I do think we're in a better position than some of the other European countries, which is why we're taking a bit of a more restrained and benign approach to it, rather than the EU, which is sort of getting on a war footing before we even know what the tariffs are. So I do think we're not going to escape the impacts of the tariff, but we probably are in a slightly better position. And I think if we eventually get an FTA with the United States, which is better for the for the United Kingdom than we would otherwise have got, then that is an upside.
Rachel Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're taking a very calm, pragmatic approach. Keir's already laid the groundwork with Donald Trump by making sure that he goes and talks to him on his terms. But I think we cannot afford to sacrifice working people in this country for the sake of political posturing about retaliation or reciprocal agreements. In my constituency, many people rely on the motor manufacturing industry for their work, and they've worked in that industry for many years. And I've got small businesses who are part of that supply chain, and that is these tariffs are going to have a massive impact on people right up and down the country. And I think we have to be calm, level-headed and pragmatic about our approach, but we haven't ruled anything out, and if we need to be strong and firm about these things, then we will be. But I know that this government has got the interests of working people in this country and British business at the forefront of any negotiations.
Hashi?
There are absolutely no upsides to introducing tariffs for anyone, and we can sit here and try and be pragmatic and positive about it, but in a situation where Donald Trump is going to intervene in this way as the biggest economy in the world, it is only going to lead to a situation where the world markets are going to be far more complicated. It's going to lead to a situation where higher prices for consumers. It's going to lead to a situation where our products being sold to America will cost more and will cause a huge amount of complications for factories like those in your constituencies. And any tariffs, any barriers to trade can never be good in these circumstances, especially when they're being wielded by the most powerful nation in the country. The last thing I'll say is Labour's got something to learn from the Canadians. We can play the sort of clever game of being cautious and kowtowing to Trump and talking to him and trying to cajole him and massage his egos with a letter from the king. But the Canadians came out fighting, and it's worked out well for them.
Yeah, but he hasn't threatened to annex us yet.
True, but the Canadians did come out with a really bold plan to buy Canadian, to put tariffs back, and they are the nearest, closest neighbours, half the size of our population, and nowhere near the size of our economy. If they've done that, we should really start thinking about how we're going to respond.
Well, we're not kowtowing to Donald Trump. We've said that we haven't ruled anything out in these negotiations, but it's no good standing up at this point before we know what's being announced and making political points that are going to have a potentially catastrophic effect on working people in this country and on our businesses. I know that those negotiations are going to be conducted well with a level and sensible head. And what we have to do is make sure we put British business first.
Lucy, now, I mean, answer the question, but also from what you hear as Whitehall editor of the FT, I mean, how close are we as a country to getting a deal with the Americans?
Well, I think it is some way away, potentially, and I've been very struck by how the semantical detail, this has moved from being described by Downing Street as a very narrow technology, data digital deal with the US to what is now being framed as an economic prosperity deal, which to me suggests a much wider agreement with many more categories, many more barriers to getting that over the line. I do think Keir Starmer is in some ways between a rock and a hard place. We saw the analysis of the Office for Budget Responsibility last week, that if he goes ahead with retaliatory tariffs, that will double almost the harm to the UK economy in escalating that trade war. On the other hand, certainly businesses, sectors in the UK and definitely foreign investors are watching very closely and want to see him stand up for their investments, for their businesses. So it's not easy for him. If I squint looking for a silver lining, and I am inclined to say that there are no direct benefits to this kind of protectionism, which is a race to the bottom, I do think that Trump's unpredictability in trade terms and in defence terms do create a more favourable backdrop for the UK's reset with the EU. And I've been interested to hear from contacts of mine in the past week that the EU is lining up to potentially come to some kind of accommodation on fishing rights in order to get this initial deal with a defence and security element to it over the line at this big summit coming up on May the 19th. So that could be one slight silver lining.
I think the government have already ruled that out.
No, I don't think they have. I
think that the Agriculture Minister, Daniel Zeichner, yesterday, why did I read this? I only read it this morning, that he had said there is no way we're linking fishing to a defence deal.
Well, that's long been the UK's position, but then the old Brexit adage, nothing's agreed till everything is agreed, has also been touted by the French and others. So
well, you're
I think
making Stewart shudder at the memory of that.
I'm getting PTSD with it. Yeah. No, I tend to agree with Lucy, actually. I think the UK government, if it only exercised it, has some leverage on fishing, because the French are very exercised about fishing, but they're also quite keen to get a defence and security pacts in place as well, and youth mobility. So we are a defence superpower, at least in Europe, and we will have control from 2026 of our entire fishing area around our coast. So I think we've got quite a strong hand. Whether that feeds through into a comprehensive deal in 2026 when the trade and cooperation agreement has to be renegotiated, that's a different issue. But just coming back to the situation with the tariffs that are coming on board, we think at 9 o'clock tonight, it couldn't have come at a worse time for Keir Starmer in respect of the fiscal headroom that Rachel Reeves has or hasn't got post-budget, and also the relative state of the UK economy, which is very difficult now. It's becalmed, let's put it politely, in terms of recruitment, in terms of GDP growth, employment. It's not looking good. So tariffs would be pretty disastrous. But I do think, broadly speaking, Starmer is right not to panic and realise that, we do have a slightly more advantageous negotiating hand than does Europe.
Just on the way that we all discuss this topic is almost like two rational and logical interlocutors trying to find a solution that's in their best interest. We're sitting here thinking about the most logical, calm manner a Prime Minister should act, thinking about not a race to the bottom, thinking about our position vis-a-vis the EU. The reality is we're dealing with an irrational man who isn't really thinking very hard about what's in the interest of the United States or anything else. And so I'm left with thinking, do we need to start thinking irrationally in these circumstances in the way that the Canadians have reacted, arguably irrationally and against their interests? If the Office of Budget Responsibility is talking about retaliatory tariffs would only cause us harm as well, well, what other options do we have? Do we just take the hit and not give anything back? What do we do?
In the end, surely it comes down to what the British public is willing to accept. And from that graph that you were talking about that I saw yesterday, if we take no retaliatory action, the amount of damage to our economy is about half the amount than if we did impose retaliatory tariffs. And that would be a lower GDP by about 1%. And we could all sit here and sort of beat our chests and say, we're not putting up with this. I'm not going to buy American products anymore. We've had several listeners say that tonight, by the way. But in the end, where does that get you? Because the people that are going to be affected by that, it's not going to be consumers paying higher prices. It's going to be people losing their jobs.
Yeah.
So whenever a politician says, yes, we should have retaliatory actions, well, how many jobs are you willing to sacrifice on the altar of feeling good about yourself?
I completely agree with that, and I would sympathise with that view. But what then that tells us is that you're prepared to take a hit on the nose rather than a knockout. And the question then becomes, are you going to just take a hit on the nose and hope for the best? Or is he going to come back for more? And that's the question.
I'm not going to be selling to my constituents the idea that they're going to lose their job at Jaguar Land Rover. That is just something that I'm not going to tolerate. And the motor manufacturing industry is absolutely vital to the West Midlands. And if that's what's being said, that the OBR has said we will do worse by retaliating, we have to take a calm step back. We know exactly what happens when people are irrational with making decisions about the economy. We saw that in 2022 with Liz Truss's budget, and my constituents, those very same people, were having to pay £200 a month more on their mortgages, and that's just an average amount. So we cannot afford to be just making political posturing points at the sake of our economy. It's not what this government is about. We have always said that we're going to be sensible and
tell that to Ed Davey.
Yeah, you did put national insurance. You are putting national insurance on, and virtually everyone in business and commerce says it's going to cost jobs.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a limit to how much we can take on trust of what this Labour government is committed to.
The Chamber of Commerce has said that this is the right approach for businesses in this country, and they have backed what Keir Starmer's approach is around tariffs. They've come out and said that very clearly this week, and let's trust what they're saying. And while we talk about national insurance contributions, the vast majority of businesses that are affected by that increase in national insurance contributions are bigger businesses. They're not the small businesses.
Well, then it's up to 5 employees, but I mean, there's a lot of businesses 5 and above that will be affected.
There are.
You
but
must have had small businesses coming to you complaining about
charities
from those national insurance contributions are going to be from the bigger businesses.
I'm curious to hear what Lucy thinks about whether or not, if we don't retaliate, what's the reaction going to be from other businesses that are affected by this?
Well, certainly, Indian investors in steel, Japanese investors in the UK automotive industry are watching. But I'd also point out that the UK's vulnerability extends far beyond the US, because if we decide not to go down the retaliatory route, we could yet become a dumping ground for cheap goods from all sorts of other places, including potentially from the EU, if we don't sort of stand up for ourselves. So there are secondary consequences.
To compensate for that, you mean?
Well, if we, as I understand it, if we decide not to go down the route of retaliatory tariffs, there are just the moving parts of other countries that cannot get or decide not to get their goods into the US and pay those tariffs could seek to seed them in the UK tariff-free.
Instead, yeah.
So,
and you could, in theory, I suppose, have a situation where, say, Donald Trump decides to impose lesser tariffs on the UK than the EU, or even no tariffs at all in the future. You could have the EU reacting to that and say, OK, well, if he doesn't, we will.
Yeah.
I mean, that would really be a game changer, wouldn't it? I mean, I can't really think that they would do that.
No. It's slightly different.
But everything's up for grabs now.
Yeah.
It's so mad.
But 14% of our economy is the service sector, which is obviously difficult. You have non-tariff barriers.
What percentage did you just say?
14%.
I think goods for services is it's quite high.
I thought it was 80%.
Yeah, something the opposite. I think we're closer to like 80-85% of services.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a significant part of our economy, and I don't think that's going to be affected by tariffs. And frankly, that's why I keep saying we're in a better and stronger position. But just coming back to historical ideas, Trump is one of many American presidents who've taken an America First approach. If you look at the period before the Second World War, there was a big America First movement that didn't want the United States to get involved and support the UK in the Second World War. And so I think there's always been that strain of isolationism in America.
Yeah, there has.
It's not a modern, irrational phenomenon.
And the United Nations, when that was formed in 1949, that was the first time that America had ever signed an international treaty.
Yeah.
So it was since their inception.
The biggest thing they've got going for them is they're a consumer country, right? They consume everything from everywhere. Yeah. And that's that purchasing power of being a consumer nation is what he's betting on.
But it may be the consumers that cause these tariffs to fail.
Correct.
Because if prices go up by 20%, then there's going to be a consumer revolt as well. Yeah. Anyway, we will move on in just a moment. It's 19 minutes past 8 here on LBC.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on Global Player. This is LBC.
21 minutes past 8 on LBC. With us, barrister and broadcaster Hashi Mohamed, Lucy Fisher from the Financial Times, Rachel Taylor, Labour MP for North Warwickshire and Bedworth, and Lord Stewart Jackson, Conservative peer. Right, Chris is in Stubbington. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Ian. Considering the rises in energy prices, has Ofgem failed customers?
Good question. Well, the energy price cap rose by 6.4% yesterday, increasing the average bill by £111. Rachel, let's start with you.
I mean, people are really struggling this month with a number of bills going up, but in particular, energy costs are a real concern.
Awful April, it's called.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty with our energy costs is that we have relied for too long on gas and fossil fuels, and we're at the risk of having dictators like Putin controlling those prices. And what we've said we'll do is bring down energy bills for good by investing in clean, green British energy from wind and solar power. And unless we wean off our reliance on gas, we are never going to control energy costs. But the government's also investing in our warm homes plan, so 300,000 homes are going to benefit from that. But I mean, the last government just failed by not diversifying the energy that we relied on. And whether Ofgem are changing or moving the price cap, the fault and the blame here lies with energy companies and our reliance on.
But doesn't it lie with
fuels.
Ofgem for failing to regulate them properly?
I don't know that there's an awful lot they can do. They've only got so much headroom to change that. I think what we have to do is say that we've got to completely transform our energy base, and we have to do what we said we were going to do in our manifesto, and that is invest in GB energy. We're already making way for onshore wind by making new rules in our planning and infrastructure bill, and that is what is going to make the real difference.
OK, Lucy Fisher.
Well, I agree it's not the fault of the regulator, but and not just the last government, but probably successive decades of governments.
If the failures in the water industry are the failure of the regulator, why can't the failures in this industry be the failure of the regulator?
Because I think we have a particular exposure to precipitous rises in the price of gas, which we saw after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I think that you look at the cost of energy for business, if we just turn to business for a second rather than households, it is the most expensive in the world, I think it's true to say. And while on the continent we see households subsidise business, in the UK, businesses subsidise household and energy costs, even though, of course, it is, as Rachel says, a struggle for many households to afford their energy bills at present. I think the scale of investment needed to really turbocharge the green revolution is, nowhere near where it needs to be in the UK. And it's going to get harder for this government because the consensus on net zero has fractured, with Kemi Badenoch talking about the 2050 target for decarbonisation being impossible, Nigel Farage's reform also being net zero sceptical. And with Donald Trump in the US pursuing a drill baby drill strategy, China continuing to sort of, fire up coal stations, I think it becomes a difficult argument for the UK government that we should pay a high price for green, clean energy when we, account for only 1% of global emissions, and we're buying expensive green tech potentially for all components from China, which they are making via fossil fuel powered methods. So it feels to me a very difficult time for sort of climate activists and the green argument.
Stewart.
I agree with a lot of what Lucy said, but I've just come back to what Rachel said. We all agree with diversification, but just in the last few months, the government has choked off investment in the North Sea, oil and gas, and it's also, just last week, permanently closed the Quadrilla gas field in Lancashire. And given that we've got potentially 100 years worth of gas if we were to pursue fracking, they've permanently closed that. So not only that, they're not, and this is the last government as well, they're not doing enough to develop small modular nuclear plants, and they're not diversifying. And I do think that the geopolitical situation is very, very difficult. And there's also a sleight of hand on net zero, let's be honest, on carbon emissions. We are having to import liquefied natural gas from places like Texas, which goes in gas form to Galveston in Texas, gets solidified, goes on a container ship or a tanker all the way to Milford Haven, and look at the CO2 emissions from that. Then it gets liquefied again and gets pumped into the grid. But the government says, well, those CO2 emissions were in Texas and in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, nothing to do with us. It's a sleight of hand. And actually, it's not a long-term, tenable, viable position to have. I do agree with a plurality of energy sources, but we haven't got that at the moment, and we're putting all the chips on net zero. And I think, as Lucy said, that's very, very risky.
Hashi.
I think it's a very, very hard time for a lot of people trying to pay their bills. And I think the analogy with the water companies doesn't quite work, because what you've got with the water companies is a regulator asleep at the wheel, allowing for the water companies to pump waste into our sewages and watercourses whilst they make significant amount of profit and not doing their jobs properly. So the money for what's there to be done for the water system is there. There's just being spaffed to people's pockets with millions upon millions of profit. So, but the energy issue is a bit more complicated, partly because of what we've just been discussing around global markets, the war in Ukraine, and all elsewhere. But there is also a fundamental lack of strategy and vision over the course of 30 years, successive governments, it has to be said, who have failed to strategically think ahead for this country, because of the way that our politics works in this country, of thinking in short-term, 5-year terms, that no government sits down and says, I'm now going to invest in a nuclear power plant for the next 20 years in the way that the French do, for example. No government sits like a German government that thinks, actually, we're going to invest in solar and other ways of ensuring our energy is independent. Now this government is thinking seriously.
Well, hang on, the German government hasn't done that at all. What they've done is they've relied on Russian oil and gas.
On the Russians.
Got rid of nuclear capacity.
And now they're catching up and they're making strategic decisions. I completely agree with you. The Russians, the most vulnerable country is Germany, actually, in that sense. But they're now starting to think about it strategically. This government now, with what Ed Miliband is doing, is thinking, but they've got two fundamental problems. One is, even where we're able to actually create our own energy, there isn't enough capacity in the grid system. And so whatever we're generating, we can't get it to the grid because there isn't enough grid capacity. And then the second thing is, you're telling people, swallow higher prices in the short term for another day that's to come in the future. And that's very hard if you've got your bills stacking up on you. It's a very hard sell on the doorstep for you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of conundrum, the tension between there is a future that requires a significant amount of patience and a present of people really, really struggling, heat or eat. We've all heard, and then taking the winter fuel allowance for people who might be more vulnerable, which strategically might have been a good decision on its own. So I think that's the tension of where we've got to, and I don't know how much Ofgem could have done about that.
Could I just come back on that? Because both governments are trying to do their best, I think, in terms of providing a good energy mix. The problem is you have a legal and regulatory regime which stops things being built. We had the £100 million Bat Tunnel, for instance, HS2.
Don't get me
And
started.
that is
Don't get me started. I'm a
absolutely
planning
why
lawyer.
we're completely changing that.
I mean, don't get me started on that nonsense.
I sat at the second reading of the Planning and Infrastructure Bill last week, and that is the one thing that I think is going to unlock growth in this country and unlock the ridiculous nature of the planning system that just puts so many of these projects at risk. But you know,
that was an EU thing, wasn't it?
Well, no, but that was HS2's poor decision-making of providing an engineering solution to an ecological problem.
He's triggered.
I'm so triggered. I'm so triggered.
Nutrient neutrality regulations, right? Very geeky, I know. You will know about this. Labour voted for them. They actually stopped, effectively, 120,000 houses being built.
Who was the Secretary of State?
Well, the Secretary of State cannot
Michael Gove
completely countermand a legal ruling by the Supreme Court, and that's what happened. And they would have been built and provided houses for families.
Well, the Planning Infrastructure Bill has a solution for that now.
But I do want to come back on something that you said. I went to see National Grid in my constituency a week or so ago, and they are already planning for those additions to the capacity on the grid. That is already happening. We are investing.
They should have been doing it 10 years ago.
We are investing in nuclear. Absolutely, but I wasn't. I wasn't an MP then, and the Labour Party weren't in government then. And what we're doing is taking a long-term approach to our energy needs going forward, and that has to be the right thing to do.
Right, we're going to go to the news in a second, but after the news, I'm going to reveal something about Rachel Taylor that none of you know, and I want each of you to think of something that none of us know about you as well. And we'll come to more questions as well. It's 8:32. News headlines with Daryl Jackson.
Lord Alan Sugar has told LBC Donald Trump's trade tariffs will be a disaster. The businessman and star of The Apprentice says he doesn't think the US president has thought them through. Donald Trump's expected to announce a fresh wave of American tariffs in the next hour. A man's been charged with 64 offences following an investigation into a Hull funeral directors. Police say allegations against 47-year-old Robert Bush, who ran the Legacy chain, involved 254 victims. The boss of Heathrow's admitted the airport was warned days before last month's major outage about power supply concerns. A substation fire led to 270,000 passenger delays. LBC weather: clear skies for most tonight, breezy in the south with showers in the far southwest by dawn and a low of -1.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
Okay, yeah.
834 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. Rachel Taylor is Labour MP for North Warwickshire and Bedford, first elected at the last election. I was reading up on you this afternoon because I like to do my research, and I found out that you are a tennis umpire, and you told me earlier that you've been an umpire in 10 Wimbledons. I can't think there are any other MPs that have ever done that.
No, I don't think there are any, and I think it's sort of prepared me quite well for.
What? Because they all speak a lot of balls.
No, I mean I think as an umpire, you never knew when the match that you were going to umpire was going to happen. You were just told it's the second match on court 2, for example, and here you don't know when the debate that you're speaking in is going to be. It's after this urgent question and that statement by a minister, and so that managing your time and not knowing when things are going to happen. I think umpiring prepared me well for that, and also not taking any rubbish from anybody.
So your career ambition must be to be speaker then.
Proper umpiring. She's not denying it.
No, she's not. No. And who's the most famous tennis player you've had to umpire?
Actually, umpiring, I think, was probably Maria Sharapova when she was first making her sort of mark on Wimbledon. Yes, I was a line judge as well. So, I've been on finals with Roger Federer and Andy Murray and Andy Roddick. So
we're all well impressed by this, aren't we?
All good fun. And I also umpired at the French Open. And what was funny there was I was umpiring a match and someone walked past and they knew it was me. They said no one had a worse French accent, and they could tell I was from the Midlands. So.
Right, one thing very briefly that we don't know about any of you, Hashi.
I get gardening advice from Alan Titchmarsh.
Goodness me, that's an impressive one.
There you go. I was on a cruise with him across the Atlantic on the Queen Mary. And I've stayed in touch with him, and he WhatsApps me what I should do with my hydrangeas.
That's not a euphemism, ladies and gentlemen. Stewart?
I once turned up to record The Weakest Link with Anne Robinson, and at the last minute they bumped me.
They told you that you were the weakest link?
Evidently so.
Lucy?
In terms of hidden skills, I was a child chorister.
Oh,
yeah.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, the voice.
Virtuous aura to it. You do. Right, anyway, enough of this. Let's go to a WhatsApp question from Mike in Salisbury. Keir Starmer today renewed his commitment to the triple lock on state pensions, with Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride having previously admitted that it's a mathematical reality that is unsustainable. How long is it going to be before all major parties accept that they need to think further in the future than the next electoral cycle? Going back to your point, Hashi, with unfunded commitments like this and public sector pensions more widely. Well, the Prime Minister told the Commons today that triple lock is safe under a Labour government, referencing Mel Stride's comment from December that it's unsustainable, along with the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch's comment on this show when she suggested that she might like to see it become means-tested in future. Hashi, let's start with you.
I think that the triple lock is the most unsustainable fiscal and economic policy this country has known in recent times. And the reason why every politician clamours over themselves to try and say it's safe is because they know the people who are most protected by the triple lock are the ones who go into a booth and put the X on a piece of paper to get them back elected. It is a generational betrayal of people who are not benefiting from it today, and it is economically unsustainable, and a grown-up country that's really thinking strategically, that isn't trying to pit one generation against the other, needs to have a look at this thing seriously.
Which is, I guess, what Mel Stride and, to an extent, Kemi Badenoch
absolutely, but they won't say that for very long before they're contradicted, because you don't want to lose those voters in every part of this country that are affected by that.
And Stride's already walked it back.
Of course he has.
Has he?
Yeah.
Of course he has. It makes sense because it's so frustrating because it's politically dynamite, but it's socially
Well, I remember
thing
when
to do.
Kemi Badenoch said that on this show when she was questioned by one of our callers to say he was somebody who was going to reform. And he said, look, tell me something that I can come back to the Conservative Party with. And she said, well, we're doing a policy review. There's got to be lots of controversial issues looked at, like the triple lock. And the Labour Party, credit to them, were on this like the proverbial. And then her people said, no, she didn't say that. I said, well, look at the transcript. She absolutely did. Rachel Taylor.
We have committed to maintaining the triple lock, and I think that's the right thing to do. The last caller talked about how difficult it was to pay those increased energy costs, and if we don't give pensioners the certainty that we're going to stick with the triple lock for the remainder of this Parliament, then what are our manifesto promises worth? We have promised that we will stick with the triple lock, and that is absolutely what we will do. And in every Prime Minister's Question Time, Keir Starmer is confirming that commitment. We promised to do that, and we will.
What if it's irresponsible and unsustainable, and you can tell that you're pitting one generation against the other? Shouldn't you, as a government, at the very least, contemplate the possibility that you could, I don't know, commission somebody to look at it and tell you whether it is sustainable or not independently, and not just commit to it because you have to commit to it?
No, we've committed to it for this Parliament, and that means we will continue to deliver that for this Parliament. I'm not talking about beyond this Parliament. We have committed to the triple lock, and that's what we will deliver. In the same way that we committed to increasing the national minimum wage and the living wage, and you know, there will be millions of people £1,400 a year better off because of that commitment. And when we make promises in our manifesto, then that is exactly what we will deliver.
It is possible to change your mind because the facts have changed and still have credibility. What's more difficult is to stick to something because you said you're going to stick to it when it makes no sense to stick to it.
Well, we don't have that information at the moment. We're already carrying out a very well thought out reform of the welfare system, and pensioners is not within that reform agenda. So it's not that we're afraid of looking at things that aren't working for this country, but we have committed to retaining the triple lock, and you know that is what we are going to do for the remainder of this Parliament.
Look, I think when the triple lock was introduced, it made a lot of sense. Pensioner poverty was a huge issue in this country. The state pension in the UK had, become, outpaced by other comparable developed nations. Now that is not the case. So I think there's a huge question about sustainability. And let's not forget that, the rows we've seen erupting in the Labour Party and beyond in the past couple of weeks about cuts to the welfare budget of $5 billion pale in comparison to the projections that the overall welfare budget, including the state pension, will rise by 25% to £378 billion by the end of this decade. So those cuts to disability and incapacity benefits are a mere drop in the ocean. To my mind, it's a key fairness question. Why should the state pension rise by more than wages growth? There's a problem in this country, Rachel, which you've talked about, people struggling to pay household bills, in-work poverty. So to my mind, it's the fairness argument that deserves more scrutiny, not just the sustainability
a fairness argument that you would have thought would appeal to Labour.
Yeah, well, quite.
Stewart.
Well, I couldn't agree more with both Lucy and Hashi, actually. I do think the time has come to end the triple lock for all the reasons they say about intergenerational fairness. There's a reason that millions of young people didn't vote at the election or are deeply disaffected with the major parties, Conservative and Labour and Liberal Democrat. I mean, the turnout amongst everyone was only 60%, one of the lowest in modern history. I think a strong government, a confident government, a real leader takes courageous decisions. And, none of the parties are popular at the moment. I mean, Labour are polling 21% today. They've got a minus 54% approval rating for the Labour government. They can probably afford to make difficult decisions now because, at the moment they're going to lose an election anyway. I don't know who would win it, but... absolutely, the comments that have been made are right, that in 2000, about the time I was standing for election in Peterborough for the first time, we did have pensioner poverty. We had Gordon Brown's 50p pension rise for pensioners. There was a lot of anger. There was pockets of pensioner poverty. Now some of the wealthiest people in the country are pensioners. The real disposable income of people over 60 is very, very high
Stewart,
compared to young people. And so I think it's an unanswerable case to not just review it, but to end it. It might take a few years, but I think we need to do it.
Stewart,
Hashi,
can you tell me a time when the Conservative Party was in power in the last 10 years where you've said what you've just said?
Oh, I said it when I was in Parliament. I mean, I did, but I was...
That's why he's not in the House of Commons anymore.
Well, it was Theresa May and her political acumen that cost me my seat in 2017. But that aside, no. I mean, I've been saying this for a long time, that the time has come. That's why I was pro-building. You know, I think the idea that you own capital and you accumulate capital and you hoard it and you say to young people, well, I own property, but I don't want your houses to be built on the end of my village or town. I think it's immoral, it's wrong, and the same for the triple lock. So, I mean, I know I probably are not enormously popular within my party to a certain extent for those issues, but I think they are both morally and politically unanswerable, and it will happen.
OK. Right, let's move on. But before we do, someone says, I note Iain did not reveal his hidden secret. Come on, Mr. Dale. Well, I can reveal exclusively on this programme that I was the longest baby ever to be born at the Evelyn Nursing Home in Cambridge.
Wow.
Something you never knew. Draw your own conclusions from that, ladies and gentlemen. It's 8:46.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:48. Hashi Mohamed, Lucy Fisher, Rachel Taylor and Stuart Jackson are with us. Here's a text question from Jasmine in Burton-upon-Trent. The MP behind the assisted dying bill says it's now or never for legalising the process. Do you agree? Well, Kim Leadbeater has said today that the conversation ends on the subject if MPs vote down her bill at the end of this month, adding that she believes her fellow MPs have a duty as parliamentarians to change the law now. I think it's actually quite insulting, Rachel Taylor, don't you? I mean, you can't just say a debate ends because I haven't got my own way.
Well, these sorts of private members' bills only come up really once in a generation. And the last time this was voted down, I've been looking at the bill with Kim. I've not been on the bill committee, but I know that there have been many hours spent, and the bill is now in a much better form than it was at the beginning of that process.
A lot of your colleagues think the opposite.
I think the safeguards that are now in place are much better. Having a panel of experts to look at issues around coercion, I think introduces much better safeguards. My mailbag as a constituency MP has been predominantly in favour of assisted dying, and I've had people writing to me sharing their awful experiences with loved ones who've been suffering terminal illness, and I feel that it's one of the things that I need to consider carefully, putting aside any religious beliefs or any sort of doctrine, but actually to look at this and say, is this going to help people up and down the country to live a more dignified life, but actually to have that conversation about their death and how they want their death to happen.
What's your conclusion?
My conclusion is that I feel a weight of responsibility, and I really do sincerely hope that the bill is passed. We've got the next reading on the 25th of April, and I don't know whether it will all be dealt with on that day or whether there'll be a further reading on the 16th of May. But I do feel that we have given this a huge amount of consideration. I think that Parliament was congratulated at the last debate on how well we discussed and debated this. I mean, I sit next to colleagues who don't agree with my position, but the debates and the discussions that we have been having have been respectful, and that's also been the case with my constituents.
Lucy?
No, I don't think that this is the end of it if it falls later this month or beyond that. I do think it's instructive that at the second reading, the key principle of it passed with a 55-vote majority, suggesting to my mind there is a firm majority for this to go ahead in the House of Commons. But I personally am very concerned about the way this bill has been brought forward, has been drafted, the safeguards. And I think, frankly, to my mind, it is potentially quite cowardly of the government to have allowed it to unspool this way. Fine, some of the big social issues around abortion, gay marriage of decades ago. I think with something of this magnitude that will cost a lot of money, that will mean reprioritising funding from other parts of the health service, that needs, frankly, to my mind, the buy-in of the Health Secretary and Justice Secretary of the day, when both those individuals, Wes Streeting and Shabana Mahmood, have made clear they oppose this policy. I think it's very problematic for it to go forward in this way as a private member's bill. So I think I could definitely see a scenario in which it doesn't pass now, but it comes back and is put forward in a more appropriate way.
Stewart?
I can't see it getting out of the Commons. I voted against it when I was a Member of Parliament in 2015. I will vote against it if it gets to the Lords. It will be completely eviscerated in the Lords because it's a very shoddily drafted bill. I don't agree with Rachel. Kim Ledbetter has allowed virtually no amendments to the bill. The bill committee has been completely stacked. They've excluded some key witnesses. But I do agree with Lucy. If it inherently has merit, which I don't think it does, because I think the ramifications are huge, the government should bring forward their own government legislation. It should have been in a manifesto. It's unfair on Kim Ledbetter to a certain extent. I hope it falls. And if the government feel it's appropriate, put it in their next manifesto, get elected on that basis and bring it forward as a government bill. But at the moment, it's a very substandard bill.
Hashi?
I mean, despite my own faith of having been raised as a good Muslim boy, I'm a big supporter of this bill. I'm a big supporter of the principle of assisted dying. I think it speaks to a situation in a country that has got a hugely ageing population. I completely agree that you need to have significant safeguards to ensure that the cracks don't fall, people don't fall through the cracks, people don't pressure people, and all the rest of the things that have been raised. But I do agree with her that it is really, in a way, now or never. I wish I was a bit more optimistic as both Stephen and Lucy in that it would come back round. But I really can't see that happening, because I think that this is a moment where this bill is being debated to some extent, maybe not as much as people would have liked, but it coming back round, and certainly coming back round in a manifesto, I don't see that happening anytime soon. And we will have a significant amount of people who could do with this bill passing and working successfully.
Right, let's move on to Izzy in Norwich, who says, with Elon Musk quitting his role in Trump's government already, what has he actually achieved, for good or ill? Well, Politico magazine in the US has reported in the last few hours that Trump has informed his cabinet and other members of his inner circle that Musk will be quitting his role running the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which is not an actual government department, and take on a supporting role instead, with a magazine saying this will happen soon. Stewart.
I think he's raised the issue of government efficiency. He's raised the issue of whether the government is spending money appropriately, and it may be quite a blunt instrument, but it's something we could do within this country, because we've got
Wes Streeting as the equivalent of Elon Musk, haven't we?
Yeah, well, there's no comparison. There's no comparison there. But Wes Streeting is right to raise the issue of potential waste, duplication, bureaucracy in government, and good luck to him. Some of the things he's done, I agree with. But I think when you've got a budget as big as the federal budget in the United States, plus all the states and counties, the fact that you're refocusing spending on the right things, I don't think is a bad thing. Whether Musk is the right person, I don't know. I mean, maybe he gets more fun out of cars and rockets blasting into space. I don't know. But he has played a role, at least in raising that issue and getting lawmakers and the media to talk about it.
Hashi?
Record timing to be leaving the government. But he's outlasted people like Liz Truss, at least, and certainly Anthony Scaramucci, who didn't last
10 days.
10 days, I think it was. Yeah. So he's at least done that, but it was an absolute joke. This guy is not serious to be running a department of a government or whatever it is. He's made a lot of money by doing other things, and it was a complete and utter disaster from the get-go. So it's good to see the back of him.
Lucy?
Well, I wonder about the motives if this is true. We've seen Tesla's sales worldwide plunge by 13% in the first quarter. So you wonder if he's wanting to run back to his businesses. What I do think he has achieved, and I think is being watched closely in Downing Street and beyond on this side of the pond, is that sense of dynamism that he has brought to that role. I mean, whether you think it's been completely reckless the way he's gone about axing these federal roles and marching onto stage with a chainsaw and so forth, that sense of dynamism, you can see how that is attractive to populations, the idea that governments could move quicker and get things done.
Rachel?
I was going to mention the plummeting of Tesla and its increasing unpopularity. But also, I think one of the things he has achieved is to say that it doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter if you think outside the box. You have something valid to say. And if you want to take your small child to work, then that doesn't necessarily prevent you from saying something good and sitting around the table. And I think that can only be good. But it's not really for us to comment on who Donald Trump chooses to be in his government.
Oh, why not? It's great fun.
And what their fate will be. Maybe he'll send another rocket.
I'm sure he will.
Can he get on it as well? That would be useful.
Right, our fun question comes from Nikki in Tunbridge Wells. What's the one product which no sky-high tariff could ever put you off buying again, and again? Lucy?
Okay, I realise the jeopardy here, but I'm going to say it anyway. And I'm not saying I drink it every day or every week, and certainly not at the moment because I'm pregnant, but I love champagne. And frankly, nothing grown in the UK, whether it's, Dorsetto or Hampshire, Sussex, sparkling wines, comes close. I just don't buy the English sparkling wine revolution. So even if that was sort of tariff to the hilt, I would still, on occasion as a treat, go for it.
Which shows us how much the FT pays their journalists, doesn't it?
Pulls out the taps.
Yes, of course.
Stuart?
Well, I think I'd man the barricades for Jaffa cakes.
I agree with you. But they have to be proper ones, not the sort of supermarket make ones.
No, they're proper, I won't name the brand, but proper Jaffa cakes, yeah.
Well, that is the brand, isn't it?
No, who makes them?
McVitie's.
McVitie's.
We don't mind doing that. Rachel?
It'd have to be tennis balls because if you play with them for a little while, they sort of lose their bounce and become flat and worn, and they're only useful to use for the dog. But I have to keep buying new
White
tennis
ones or
balls
green
all
ones?
the time. Always green ones. White ones seem to go out of fashion, but they always used to be the balls that were used on grass courts. So that they were only used in this country, really. And I think we just went with everybody else and went for the green balls. But I always say it's the favourite thing for me to do at the end of a busy day is to smack some furry green balls as hard as I possibly can. But yeah, I'd have to say I keep buying tennis balls regardless of the tariffs.
3 of us have just crossed our legs. Hashi?
I'm a huge fan of Haagen-Dazs. I shouldn't eat as much, but Haagen-Dazs and Ben & Jerry's, especially Ben & Jerry's sticky toffee, it's going to ruin my teeth. But Ben & Jerry's and Haagen-Dazs.
Well, many of you will have made many judgments about our panel on the basis of their answers to that question. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for coming in today. Monday's panel includes the Green MP, Dr. Ellie Chowns, and LBC's very own Aggie Chambry, which means that there are 2 guests still to book. Corey's going to have a busy week. Coming up in the next hour, well, it is Trump hour. It's tariff hour in the next hour because we are expecting to hear from the President imminently in the Rose Garden telling us what tariffs he's going to put on UK goods and indeed worldwide goods. We'll have expert reaction. We'll have your reaction. 0345 6060 973. We'll play you, I think, well, depending on how long it is, but depending on when he starts, we hope to carry the whole speech live because it is one of those speeches that I think is going to have an impact on our country, on the world economy for possibly decades to come. And it doesn't get much bigger than that.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.